Stoic Techniques for Managing Stress. Wisdom from Seneca Introduction, my dear friend. You who are listening to these words, I am Lucius Annaeus Seneca, a philosopher, a teacher, and above all, a man who has faced the tempests of life. From my days, in exile on the island of Corsica to the trials of navigating the court of Emperor Nero, I have learned that the true battlefield lies within the mind. Stress, anxiety, and fear are not external enemies, but winds that blow through your soul, and you alone have the power to decide how to set your sails. In your modern world, I see pressures no less daunting than those of my time. Work, relationships, expectations, and the incessant noise from those curious devices you call social media, all can unsettle your mind. But fear not, for the Stoic philosophy that I, along with my fellow thinkers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus have honed, will serve as your guiding light. Today, I will share 3 powerful techniques to manage stress. Focusing on the present moment, controlling your reactions through negative visualization, and practicing gratitude. Listen closely and let these words be a beacon in your darkest days. Focus on the present moment, my friend. Ask yourself, how often does your mind wander to the past, regretting mistakes long gone, or leap to the future, dreading what has not yet come? The past cannot be changed, and the future is a canvas yet to be painted. Only the present is where you truly live, where you can act, where you can find peace. Why the present is all you have. In my letters to Lucilius, I wrote, "We are torn between the past and the future, and so we never truly live, but only hope to live." Stress often arises when your mind is trapped in what-ifs and what might be. You worry about an upcoming exam, a meeting with your boss, or an unresolved argument. But these worries do not exist in the present. They are shadows cast by your mind without substance. Picture yourself standing by a river. The water flowing before you is the present, but you cannot touch the drops that have passed, nor grasp those yet to come. If you keep chasing the water that's gone or waiting for what's ahead, you will exhaust yourself. Stoicism teaches us to stand still, observe the river, and act in this moment. Practicing mindfulness to anchor yourself in the present, I recommend 2 simple exercises I used during my lonely days in Corsica. Conscious breathing. Sit down, close your eyes, and focus on your breath. Inhale, feel the air pass through your nose, filling your chest. Exhale, feel your body relax. If your mind wanders, gently bring it back to your breath. Just 5 minutes a day will calm your mind. Your breath is a gift of the present. It is always there, waiting for you to notice. Sensory observation. Take a moment to notice your surroundings. What do you hear? The chirping of birds, the hum of traffic, or the whisper of the wind? What do you smell? Coffee, old books, or rain? Touch something, a table, a piece of clothing, and feel its texture. This exercise pulls you out of chaotic thoughts and roots you in the now, the benefits of living in the present. When you learn to live in the present, you realize that stress is often a product of imagination. An upcoming argument is only frightening when you amplify it in your mind. A daunting task is only heavy when you think about it, instead of doing it. Act now, step by step, and you will find that the mountains you thought impossible to climb are merely gentle slopes. Control your reactions. The practice of negative visualization. Premeditatio malorum. Now, let me share a technique I call premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils or negative visualization. It may sound daunting, but it is one of Stoicism's most powerful tools for managing stress. What is negative visualization? Do not misunderstand me, my friend. I am not asking you to live in fear. Instead, I urge you to prepare your mind for challenges that may arise. Each morning, I would sit and imagine the difficulties I might face that day. Criticism from a friend, a setback at work, or even an unexpected storm. I did this not to frighten myself, but to remind myself that these events are within my power to endure. In my letters to Lucilius, I wrote, We should prepare our minds for the worst while always acting with the best in mind. When you visualize challenges, you strip them of their power. You are no longer caught off guard, and thus you are no longer overwhelmed by them. How to practice negative visualization. Try this exercise. Each day, take a few minutes to think about a situation that might cause stress. For example, if you're anxious about a presentation, imagine forgetting a part of your speech or the audience responding poorly. Then ask yourself, if this happens, what will I do? Plan your response. Perhaps you'll take a deep breath, smile, and carry on. Or maybe you'll have a witty remark ready to ease the tension. More importantly, remind yourself that these disasters are not the end of the world. If the presentation fails, you still have family, friends, and opportunities to improve. If you face criticism, it does not diminish your worth as a person. As my fellow Stoic Epictetus said, it is not events that disturb you, but your judgment of them. Why this technique? Works negative visualization familiarizes you with the idea that failure, loss, or hardship is part of life. When you've mentally rehearsed these scenarios, they lose their power to panic you. Instead of being swept away by stress, you respond with calm and clarity. I once faced a death sentence from Nero, but by preparing my mind for the worst, I maintained my serenity until the very end. Practice gratitude. Finally, my friend, let me speak of gratitude, the antidote to the storms of the mind. When you focus on what you have rather than what you lack, you will find peace even on the worst of days. Gratitude. The Stoic way in my work. On The Happy Life, I wrote that happiness does not come from possessing more, but from appreciating what you already have. Consider this. You have a roof over your head, food on your table, and people who care for you. Even on a bad day, there are blessings waiting for you to notice. Gratitude is not about denying difficulties, but about putting them in perspective. A bad day is not a bad life. A failure does not define who you are. When you focus on the good, stress becomes smaller in comparison. How to practice gratitude. Here are 2 simple exercises to cultivate gratitude. Gratitude journal. Each evening, write down 3 things you are grateful for that day. Could be a delicious meal, a smile from a stranger, or simply the fact that you are still breathing. I did this in Corsica, noting small moments like sunlight streaming through a window or the sound of waves crashing on the shore. Daily gratitude. Reminder. Each morning, ask yourself, what am I grateful for today? It might be your health, a friend who supported you, or the chance to learn something new. This reminder shapes how you view the entire day. The benefits of gratitude. When you practice gratitude, you realize that life is full of small gifts. Stress can make you feel like the world is against you, but gratitude reminds you that there is still much to cherish. During my exile, I found joy in reading, writing, and observing nature. These small things saved my soul. Applying these techniques to your life, my friend. These techniques are not instant miracles. They require practice like an athlete training their muscles. But I promise you, if you persist, your mind will grow stronger against the storms of life. A day with Stoicism. Imagine a day infused with these techniques. Morning. Start with 5 minutes of conscious breathing to anchor yourself in the present. Then practice premeditatio malorum. Visualize a potential challenge, like a stressful meeting, and plan your response. Throughout the day, when stress arises, ask yourself, is this within my control? If not, let it go. If it is, take small, deliberate actions. Evening. Write down 3 things you're grateful for. Let these positive thoughts guide you into sleep. Final advice. Life is a series of challenges, but you are not alone. I, Seneca, faced dark days, and I overcame them through Stoic philosophy. You can do the same. Remember, you cannot control the storm, but you can control how you steer your ship. Live well, live wisely, and live with gratitude, my friend. Let these techniques be the flame that lights your path no matter how thick the darkness.